All right, Stephen. Well, first, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for inviting me.
So I was so excited to learn about the idea we're going to discuss today, polyvagal theory, for a number of reasons we'll get into. And of course, in a little bit, I'm going to ask you to define it, which I'm sure you've done a billion times in your life. But I actually want to start here, which is as somebody who is really considered the founder of this idea, I think the one who uncovered it, why do you think it's important for the average person to at least be aware of this?
Yeah, I think it's what we tend to forget is our own bodily state, our own physiological state has a great effect on how we react and live in the world. So when our bodies are calm, we're more resilient, we're more engaging, more accepting of others. And when our body's in a state of, let's say, mobilization or threat, we're extremely evaluative and defensive.
Yeah, I think it's a great way, and understanding what that is and how it impacts us. So,
And actually understanding to be aware of it and then kind of understand who we are at that point in time and then managing ourselves with that information.
Again, we're going to get into the theory, but before we do, I'm curious on just the people who heard what you just said. I think often say, well, look, fight or flight or this idea of feeling stress is an evolutionary adaptation that's got us to where we are. It is a key component of who we are, and it's normal, natural, etc. Would you say that we are in greater moments of stress now than we were back when survival was more difficult?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So the question, though, is you're really hitting on the important point, and that is we have a nervous system that is very accessible to respond to threat. But what we forget, and this is like when people say, oh, we've always done this, the part of the evolutionary journey of a social mammal, and we are social mammals, is not our threat reactions. We inherited those literally from the primitive reptiles that became the primitive mammals. So threat reactions are really wired into us. What became unique is this ability to detect signals of safety from another of our species or related species so that we can literally be calmed down by the presence of another person or perhaps a pet like a cat, dog, or horse. And we experience that. And the issue is our ability to react, yeah, no problem. Our ability to calm, our ability to be calmed is really the important part that enabled society to occur, enabled businesses to occur, because being able to literally be co-regulated by another human being allowed us to be physiologically safe enough in the presence of another to develop feelings of trust. And that's the basis of business and relationship.
When you say that word co-regulated by somebody else, I think a lot of times, myself included, there's this initial reaction of dependence and that being a bad thing.
Yeah, well, even in our parenting style, we want to talk about self-regulation. And we need to really start talking about co-regulation and how that develops into self-regulation. Because this ability to regulate ourselves doesn't occur independent of a good experience of co-regulating. Basically, let's take any adult who's in a frightening situation, whether they're going into surgery or they've been, injured, or they're in a, let's say a frightening situation. They're going to use mental images of feeling safe enough in the presence of a significant other, a parent, a loved one, their child, or perhaps even their pet. They'll use that association to feel a sense of being co-regulated, even in the abstract.
Do we need to have other people around, or do we need to have that memory or that person or that thing to actually feel calm?
This is actually it's a much deeper question than you probably realize.
Okay, good.
Because we have natural experiments going on all the time of this, and that is people who have been abused within their homes. So they don't have any memories of feeling safe enough in the presence of, let's say, a biological parent. So the biological parent is really the source of injury. Now these individuals, their nervous system doesn't trust others, and they're very hard to work with in institutions such as therapeutic models, education, because the body has been repurposed, retuned to be defensive. And in the normal developmental trajectory, there are certain people in our lives that our body gives up its defenses and says, I'm safe in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
A part of the problem, of course, as we discuss this, is how people think they should parent their children,
Right.
as opposed
Yeah.
because they don't want to, quote, spoil them, and the real world is rough. But they don't understand that the co-regulation, the making of the safety, is not buffering them or keeping them from going out and expanding and challenging. It's giving them a resource that buffers them from the disruptions. And so it's almost counterintuitive. It's saying, if I have good co-regulation, guess what? I can literally reject the co-regulator and go off and expand my life experiences and take on interesting challenges. But if I don't have that good co-regulator, how do I feel? I never feel safe enough. Now, there are a lot of, I would say, people have spent decades on developing what they would call attachment theories. And I'm just basically saying you don't need the complex theory. You just have to ask the question, has your body felt safe enough to trust another?
Got it. Okay. I think we just dove so right into an amazing subject, and I want to just pause and make sure I understand it, make sure those listening get it. One of the kind of primary things you just mentioned is, one, by having a parent early on in your life that you trust and feel safe with,
Yeah.
that will do a number of things. One is it will allow you to build trust in others in the future because you have that model. The second point we discussed is, as a parent, it is okay to fully embody that that source of trust for your child without worrying about maybe coddling or overindulging them, because that will give them the ability to self-regulate in the future.
Yeah, but first of all, it doesn't have to be a biological parent.
Okay.
It can be someone in close proximity during development. So we don't want to say that we're so limited to only our biological parents.
Mm-hmm.
And for some individuals, they literally have had pets, dogs and horses that served in a, let's say, a dysregulated home to help them co-regulate in that situation. So we see the flexibility and adaptiveness of the human with other social mammals. So I'm basically giving you an optimistic story here.
Sure.
The other part, I mean, of course, we would like loving parents who are mature enough to realize that that's their role, is to create an unconditional safety network for their child without evaluating that they're spoiling them. But what happens is they think of co-regulation as protection. That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to protect your child, and that's not what the nervous system of the child is feeling. The nervous system of the child wants the presence of the parent to be there in case they need it. We are naturally curious people. You're a curious guy. That's what this whole podcast is about.
Yeah.
So the creativity, the curiosity, the expansiveness of thinking is wired into you, and it's wired into, that's what it is to be a human. Right. And often when we think of taking care of our children, we literally create the boundary that interferes with that creativity, expansiveness. And I'm saying the co-regulation is more that I'm present with my child, I'm there for them, I'm not stepping between them and this ability to experience the world. Of course, you're going to have to at many times, but understand your goal is not to keep them away from the world. Mm-hmm. Your goal is to enable them to literally slide in, navigate into it.
You hit on such a hot button. Last night I had this discussion with my wife. My kids, I've got 3 boys, and 8, 5, and basically a newborn. And the 2 older ones were sprinting through the house, and often they will slide and slip on our tile, and, you know, it's going to hurt. So my wife says, hey, don't run over here, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's 1. Then 2 is they were fighting, and it got loud, and she was like, hey, don't hurt each other. And then there was a third issue very similar at play. And I said, hey, we can't keep telling them to stop doing things. My question to you is, and I don't know if you're a parenting expert, so I'm just
Yeah.
asking because we're there. For parents listening, where can we draw that line of being
Oh,
there for them and protection without going too far to take that away?
listen, I'm a parent. My kids are probably your age,
Mhm.
but you're still a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And you still your mandate as a parent is you don't want your kids injured. You want to facilitate their trajectory and success in life. And when I say we don't want them injured, it's not merely falling and hurt. We don't want them psychologically abused or insulted or humiliated. It's the same thing. We want them to have good experiences. So you have to. There's the issue of was your or were your children's behavior uh, creating opportunities to be injured, and then you want to intervene. So that becomes important. But if not, if it's, then you say, well, is their behavior merely disruptive to me?
Got it.
Then you have to place it into a different realm. Maybe you need to go to another room, or maybe you need to have your kids do whatever they're doing in another place.
Got
So
it.
you start going into these different, basically configurations of the same thing. The other one, which I think has, I was caught into, and so were my parents with me as a child. Don't embarrass me.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
what will they think of me? People on the outside, if my kids act that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that we have to be very careful about
Okay.
because kids are kids and adults literally are reacting and experiencing the world differently.
Right.
So I think the most important one is the first one, safety.
Okay.
You have, and that's actually, I hate to say this is where I see father and mother roles being different. And the father role was always setting the boundaries, and I never liked that. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't fun. The
Mm-hmm.
mother was always there. You see, I think mother's roles are really kind of, unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
Father's roles are like drawing the line,
Yeah.
not so much fun. So I used to say, can never be a good dad, but you can be a great grandpa and a good uncle, because you can literally pick whatever you want to do and have that experience. But the parent has certain responsibilities that are not always about positive or pleasant experiences.
That's a good point. So that was a big thing that we talked about. Another one that you said very nonchalantly, because you know this, but I find fascinating. You said, and correct me where I'm wrong, um, a lot of our kind of generalized fight or flight or stress response evolved from reptiles, which then went to mammals and eventually us or something. I don't
Yeah,
know. And then, but there is a different part that is unique to humans,
yeah,
which is our stress response with each other. Could
yeah.
you
Okay,
go into that a little more?
we're going to unwind this a little bit
Okay.
because when we talk about humans, we're also talking about other social mammals.
Oh, like a
So
dolphin?
dolphin, a dog, a
Oh,
cat,
okay.
other primates. They take care of their young. They
Mm.
play. Even you can watch rats play. So it's not like
Oh, it's not just us.
it,
Okay.
right. So the interesting one is you can see kittens. I always like this picture because I use it. Kittens doing rough and tumble. You can visualize that.
Hmm.
And when I was in graduate school, we were saying, "Oh, they're practicing their hunting skills." Okay, nah, that's not what's going on.
Wow.
Look closely, and their claws are retracted, and even though they do mouth or bite, they don't break skin.
Hmm.
And what they're doing, and they're always maintaining face-to-face interaction. So they're playing. And dogs do this too. When dogs play, they keep face to face. When they're in aggressive mode, that face is no longer face to face. So
Ah,
we are signaling as a social mammal cues of safety and play versus aggression. And we get confused. So like a cat, cats they have claws. Just think about, and they have sharp teeth.
hmm.
It's not the same thing. So hunting is not the same thing as rough and tumble playing.
Right, right.
You can see the same things on playgrounds. When do kids get into fights versus when are they enjoying the interaction?
Got it.
It's not the physical contact, it's the violation of face to face with physical contact.
Okay. Okay. And so to get back to it, you're saying that social mammals have this.
Yeah,
It's a secondary system almost.
Well, it's kind of a separate. Okay, so the real part is social mammals have this, and I'm going to tell you what this is.
Okay.
The ability to detect signals from the other of safety. So when we so like you're a engager. I can tell by your voice, and you like that.
Yeah.
But people. I'm sure you've had them on the podcast. That there are going to be some people who their voices are not very melodic, their faces are very flat, and in your mind you're saying, "Holy crap! I have to do an hour with this person.
Exactly.
How do I get this person
No
alive? Right? How do I get them alive? What do I do? What do I say?" So what that person did was based on their physiological state, which might be locked into a state of, I'm going to use the term threat or fear. They were broadcasting that to you, which is a violation of that co-regulation engagement. And how did your nervous system respond to it?
Mm-hmm.
It says,
yes.
So, yeah, well, I have a term that I call biological rudeness.
Okay.
Okay, so let's pretend, let's create this scenario where you with your, kind of exuberance and excitement and engage and say, "Hi, Steve," and I kind of like turn away.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I will. My first thing would be like, "Uh-oh, what did I do?"
Right.
Yeah.
It is biologically rude because you had the expectancy of a reciprocal, "Hi, Chris, how are you doing?"
Yeah.
And that was the completion of that neural expectancy. So the violation of turning away, which occurs in real life very frequently, creates a physiological feeling that something's wrong. What did I do? Like what you said. So what happens, let me kind of give you the texture. I'm a university professor and I have decades in that interesting arena, which is not noted for its sociality. Okay, let's start there.
Yep.
And so let's say I'm a grad student and I want to meet this famous professor, and I walk up to him, put my hand out, and the professor doesn't even look at me and walks by. Now, what's my interpretation?
Jerk, first of all, and I'm unimportant.
Well, the jerk bit is you don't say that, but you say to yourself, "Yeah, I'm unimportant."
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're talking to a famous professor and you're a young professor, you have the same thing. So we already have interpreted it as an evaluation and taken responsibility for the response. Now let's shift the interpretation using the lens of the polyvagal theory, which comes, let's say that the individual's social engagement system, that aspect of the nervous system, is really quite, let's use the term, dormant, meaning it has a lot of features of people who would be on autism spectrum, which many academics are.
Okay.
So in a sense, their physiology is not tuned for social engagement. It's tuned for objects, which is part of the selectivity or selection procedures for graduate school in science, physics, and engineering is really not sociality, but the ability to attend to objects. Okay. Wow. So you follow. So now with this wonderful big brain that we have, we're making an interpretation that has nothing to do with the intentionality of the other.
Wow. When moments like this happen, my brain goes, how do I do this in the next 36 minutes? I love this. Okay. First question, because this happens to me a lot. Do people have varying degrees of this attunement? And do people have varying degrees of giving it precedence? Like what I mean by that is I feel like I over-index in this and allow my emotional state to be impacted by others more than I would like it to be.
Okay, so there are a lot of things that you said in those couple of sentences. There are assumptions that may not necessarily be true.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so what we're talking about is this literally gift that mammals have, and that is to calm ourselves down or others through facial expressivity, intonation of voice, signals of safety. And when we expect signals of safety and they're not coming, then our bodies feel like, oh, something's violated. And I call that biological rudeness, but there's a violation of a neural expectancy. That's being human. So the fact that you're sensitive is not an intentional aspect of you. You're not going to learn not to be as sensitive. What you'll learn is that when you have that bodily feeling, that visceral feeling, there's a term called interoception, which is what those sensations inside my body feel like. You will reinterpret them. You say, wow, did my nervous system get tricked again? That's what you'll learn. I got tricked again. Shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of a dynamic, seductive dance. And when there's a violation of I'm becoming accessible, which is a word I frequently use, and when my accessibility is literally being violated, I'm saying, say hello to me, Chris. And Chris says, I didn't even see that signal. So,
Right.
and so I'm just going on. I'm walking down the hall. I didn't even see you. And so Chris interprets it as dismissive of him, when the real causality is that my nervous system didn't detect your cues, and I was just in the same state I was before you walked up to me.
Got it. Okay. Is there a tie to, I don't want to call it mental illness, but we'll call it like anxiety or depression, or I don't know, name your things.
We can call it, yeah, we can build ties to any of that, stress related disorders, even having fever, even having like you're physiologically you're wasted, you exercised a lot. All these things result in a retraction of the system. So it's like let's say you do a jogging, you do a lot of exercising, you come back home, and the signals from your face are not as exuberant or reactive, and your wife may respond to you and say, what's the matter? Or why didn't you respond to my needs? Or your kids may say, where's dad? It's like you're not being present for them at the time when their bodies need it.
Right.
So yeah, this is the bit. And so in your world of coaching within a corporate model, people think everything is delivered in language. So it's the words we use. We text, we use words, and they minimize the importance of intonation, the voice, and how people feel with that. And this is, in a sense, it's a naive, I'm going to say almost a stupid strategy, but I don't mean to be dismissive of how most of the world works. But we tend to have the inappropriate belief system. And the belief system is, if I send Chris a text, that's sufficient. Chris's nervous system will interpret from my text my intentionality and what I'm really saying. Now, it may, but if you go back, and you may not be old enough to go back to when emails just started. This is an interesting story, because people used to write emails, and then you get a email back and say, why are you angry at me? Because they'd be very terse. They wouldn't have a hi, how are you? And then how are you, best regards. They didn't have the closure that we were used to having in our social interactions.
Got it.
Okay. And then the world moved to texting and this chat. And what happened in that is that the nervous system, when triggered with a message, or when you send it, wanted a response in real time. So I would used to ask people, how long can you tolerate a delay between a text and a response before your body shifts state? So these are all things that our modern technology brought into our mode of social communication that end up at times being very disruptive to us.
And these things are individualized, right? Like,
yeah,
that's what I'm trying to understand is, can you see, or what is it about people that the answer to that question is different? Because my wife can wait hours and not text and be fine.
Yeah, but you can't. But you can't.
I cannot.
Okay. So you already told me a lot about your system versus your wife's.
Great.
So obviously she's calmer than you are.
100%. So much. Yeah.
So obviously, again, in terms of relation with the children feel calm in her presence.
Right.
And in your presence, they're more activated, mobilized, playful. You might see it.
Exactly.
Okay. So because you're both broadcasting different signals to your children and to each other. So your first question is really the individual difference one. So we've talked really about that we have a neural structure, and how do we recruit that? And I'm going to basically say there's something that I call basically autonomic flexibility, or I'm very focused on the vagus, which is a cranial nerve that calms us. But I'm very focused on the ability of that flexibility, which when it gets retracted, enables our sympathetics or mobilization to be very efficiently recruited. But then when it comes back, it calms us down.
Mm.
So I would basically say your wife probably has a more efficient autonomic regulation so that, yeah, she can play, she can run, she can do that, but it's going to come back down very rapidly. And she becomes to you and to the kids very present,
Hmm.
where you will be more mobilized.
Yep. Here's the thing. I don't like that. Can I change
Oh,
that?
okay. You want everything in an hour. Is that what you want?
No.
The
I just want you to pique my interest
okay,
for those listening.
okay. First, I would say is of course you could, but I would start off by saying to understand the benefits and literally the attributes of who you are.
Mm.
So it starts off on the psychoeducational journey of awareness of who we are, a better understanding of our autonomic state. And when we become more aware of the state we're in, then it becomes our choice of how we literally navigate in the world. If we're kind of overly mobilized, maybe a quiet room for a little bit, maybe some breathing, maybe
Hmm.
a headset with calming music. Maybe that's what you need for a while. And then you can re engage with more resource.
Got
So
it.
the part that I think you're locked into is the notion of intentionality.
Hmm.
And the degree of intentionality, once you put it in the realm of intentionality, you feel that you should have control over it. And
Right.
I'm saying, don't worry about that. Be aware of it, navigate with it. And as you become aware of it, you gain more control over it.
Makes sense. I love it. So I think we have kind of backed into, but I couldn't help it because the questions just flow from me. I think we've backed into a little bit about polyvagal theory. Could you just give us your definition for those like myself who had really never heard of it? What does it mean?
Well, let's start off with the first important point, and that is our physiological state impacts on how we respond in the world, and that's
Okay.
really what we've been discussing. Take
Mhm.
that as principle one. The second point is to understand that what are the physiological states we could be in? What's the toolkit? What's the resources of our physiological states? And those physiological states are really a combination of how different neural circuits evolved in vertebrates and finally in terms of mammals that created literally three different pathways to regulate physiological state. And those pathways are evolutionarily hierarchically organized, meaning the newest one kind of repurposes and contains the older one. But when you take the newest one off, you're like a reptile at times. You become more aggressive or shutting down.
Okay.
So the newer one is the one that's linked with uh, sensitivity to intonation of voice, facial expressivity, mother's lullaby.
Hmm.
So, in a sense, a baby can be crying, and we actually did this study. We took 9-month-old babies and literally challenged them by the mother would play with them, then the mother would not use her face, basically froze her face, and then re-engage. And that's called still face paradigm. And it was developed by a friend of mine, Ed Tronick. It's really a remarkable thing to observe. But we monitored, we actually recorded the intonation of the mother's voice and the baby's heart rate and distress behaviors.
Wow.
So the mother plays for 2 minutes, freezes her face for 2 minutes, then re-engages using gestures and words to calm the baby. If you look at the intonation of the mother's voices are they're still talking, but they can have a lot of intonation, which the word is prosody, a lot of emotion in the word hi, how are you,
Hmm.
kind of bit like you might talk. Do you have pets?
Yes, I have a dog.
How do you talk to your dog?
Just like I talk to my 5-year-old. I say, hello,
Yeah,
puppy.
yeah, but not to your 8 and 11 year old.
No, no, nope. Yep.
And what does your 5-year-old and dog do?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes.
No choice but to do that because it's wired into them. Now try it with your 8 and 11 year olds, more prosodic voices, and they will respond to you more like they respond to your wife. So it's
Mm.
going to be kind of an interesting experiment to try. Anyway, so the voices, we were able to quantify that intonation effect. If the mother's voice was very prosodic, the distress behaviors immediately disappeared and the baby's heart rates dropped by 10 beats per minute.
Wow.
If the mother's voices were not prosodic, no effect on behavior or heart rate of the baby.
I
So
have
that,
to. Can I pause you real quick? Because I'm quick theory. Is this ingrained in us because, let's say, as an infant, we can't we we can't identify fear, like we can't identify deadly things, so we have to be able to identify somebody else identifying deadly things or
well,
something like that.
no, okay. So you're making again assumptions.
Yeah, yeah,
So
totally.
each of the assumptions we need to address.
Oh, okay.
And the answer is the nervous system certainly can identify life threat.
Okay.
And we see this in preterm babies really easily because they often stop breathing and they often have massive slowing of heart rate called bradycardia. And that's a physiological response, just like a reptile immobilizing.
Wow.
So it is literally a life threat response.
Okay.
And, you'll hear stories about people being unable to move. They're so scared. That's part of the same system being recruited. And you'll hear people talking about defecating and urinating under those fear because now that older vagal circuit, which I really didn't articulate,
Mhm.
is being charged. So we need to get that hierarchy. I mentioned there was a
Yeah, I
hierarchy.
want to hear that. Yep.
Okay, the oldest one, which goes way back to jawless fish, is a dorsal vagus. It's in the dorsal part of the brainstem. It's the vagus, as nerve comes out, goes to virtually all our organs in our body. And that was the major neuroregulation in these very primitive, ancient vertebrates. And then along the line, a spinal sympathetic nervous system comes in with bony fish. And now you see the coordination group activities. You see sympathetics are mobilizing and enabling the organisms to move. So you had basically these two circuits, and they remain that way for amphibia and for reptiles. But now mammals evolve. And there are a couple of things we understand about mammals. One, they're dependent on each other at birth, which is part of the part you were bringing up.
Hmm.
The other one is they do suckle, they nurse.
Hmm.
And the ingestive aspect of suckling is literally a neural stimulation of that ventral, that neurovagal circuit. So what happens in embryology, which is the development of the brainstem in mammals, is some of the cells that regulate the dorsal vagus go on a journey. They go ventrally in the brainstem and they link up with the area of the brainstem that regulates the muscles of the face and head. Now, what does that do? It means that now our facial expressivity, including our vocalizations and our ability literally to listen, are now linked with the vagal regulation of our heart. So we are now broadcasting our physiological state in our face and in our voice.
Oh my
So
gosh.
this is the true story of the evolution of social mammals. They were able to create a safe situation through their vocalizations. They could communicate and say, I'm not in a state of threat. And we still feel that way. We wouldn't go near a barking dog. We
Right.
wouldn't go near a yelling individual. We still have that same physiological reaction to vocalizations. We don't like high pitched sirens and we don't like rumbles of earthquakes. Our body is attuned to certain frequencies to say, stay away from it. It's wired into us. But we're wired to certain frequencies that tell us we're safe.
Mm.
And that's the prosodic voice, literally a mother's lullaby.
Hmm.
Now, what I did was I actually developed an intervention based upon this principle, and where I took basically music and computer altered it to basically modulate it within the same frequencies of a mother's voice. And that's called the Safe and Sound Protocol, and it's used to deal with basically a lot of the disorders you were talking about
Wow.
that are associated with like hypervigilance, being always concerned about what's going on around you,
Hmm.
auditory hypersensitivities, features of chronic anxiety, features of depression, and even features of autonomic issues like chronic fatigue syndrome and irritable bowel.
Wow. And so there's these three hierarchies. Are they all part of the vagal system or vagus nerve?
Well, two of them are.
Okay.
and they come from different areas of the brain stem. Here's the confusion,
Yeah.
because you think you may know nothing, but I would say that most of the world, including the medical professionals, also know nothing about this. And that's why everyone's talking about hacking the vagus. It's very common.
Exactly. Like gargling is a new thing, or humming. I've
Yeah,
heard. I want to. Yeah.
humming is good.
Okay.
Humming
Okay.
is good. But the issue is the vagus is a nerve. What does that mean? It's a wire. It's a cable.
Okay.
It doesn't have intelligence. It doesn't make decisions. So it's a misunderstanding of what's going on. It's a cable. It's a cable plugged into your brain.
Right.
So the real question is, where in the brain are the areas that regulate the vagus? And there are two areas, one in the dorsal area and one in the ventral area. The dorsal area is primarily stuff below the diaphragm. The ventral area primarily stuff above it, and the linkage of that with the face.
Got it. Okay. And so the dorsal one is the one that part of the brain that it's been around forever.
Yeah.
The other
Ventral,
one,
ventral is new.
and that's a new one. Okay.
Yeah. And the issue is the ventral is also, let's give a kind of a dash and say it's part of our social engagement system. So
Right.
what does this mean? It means that social behavior is a vagal nerve stimulator.
Yes. Okay.
And
Got it.
that's why it's calming social, like let's say you're in the hospital
Mhm.
or your kids are ill. What do you try to do? You try to calm your child because you know the body will heal better when it's calmer.
Okay. And so it's I know it's not this simple, but for
Yeah.
us, it's like if my son is sick and I go up to him, I say, "Hey buddy, I know you're not feeling great. Let's cuddle or whatever."
Yeah.
It's basically going to a part of the brain that says I'm safe, which triggers the vagal system, the nerve to signal through the wire things
Yeah.
that allow the body
Heal.
to enter a certain state.
To heal.
Okay.
And this is another conceptualization, because polyvagal theory says healing occurs in the body, and it's not healing by the physician. It is the body that's doing the healing. So the signals of healing have to be processed appropriately. And if someone is frightened, the signals of healing or safety are not going to get there.
Right. Is it better? And I know that's a very big, but to be more in that, I don't even know what the state is, just a calm state for your body.
Well, better, you see, you're very,
I
pardon
know.
me, right? My sarcasm here.
No, I get it.
You're very judgmental.
Yes. Yeah.
Better is only context dependent. So, it's not better if you're, let's say, in the infantry on the front lines. It's not better if you're a first responder. So there's a whole series of understanding the context and matching the context with the most efficient and effective autonomic state that gives you the resource to survive.
Great. So would you say, again, like autonomic flexibility is a goal?
Autonomic flexibility is the goal. Yes.
Love it.
To be able to use all these circuits. That's why when we use the word I love to use the word neural exercise, because what we really are doing is moving in and out of these states as an exercise, so that we have that flexibility to adapt to complex demands.
Whoa, something just hit me. Does this link up to heart rate variability at all?
Oh, certainly does. That's where it all. So what you don't know,
because I have an Oura ring that I've been,
Okay, but what you don't know is my relationship with heart rate variability.
I don't. Let's hear it.
Okay. Well, the first one to publish studies on it as an individual difference. Yeah.
Was you?
And, it was me in the 60s. So
look at this. Round of applause. Now I'm ready.
So everything in polyvagal theory evolved from my research in heart rate variability.
Wow.
And it was trying to understand the neural regulation of the heart. So where heart rate variability, like 5 decades later, where it's kind of like I would view it as more pedestrian and less interesting, is that people lost the interest in the neural regulation that was literally became available through methodologies. And I developed several of these to extract clean measures of ventral vagal regulation.
I don't know what any of that means.
Okay, basically the social engagement system is linked to that ventral vagus, but I actually developed a technology that accurately measures that ventral vagal influence from the heart rate variability pattern.
Whoa.
But what happened was that was very neurophysiologically based. So it's not like saying, well, variability is a descriptive statistic.
Hmm.
So people really were gravitating to what's easy. So with Oura rings and with even Fitbit,
Yep.
they're measures of heart rate variability, even though they may put lots of money into the algorithm,
Mhm.
are not that sensitive to the neural regulation. And this disturbs me from a, let's say, intellectual professional level,
Great.
because the vision was there that you could develop these very fine-tuned measures of neural regulation uh, if you took the time to understand the physiological signal itself. So anyway, that's my history. It's decades of it.
No, no, that's I mean, I'd love to spend a minute here, which I guess the first question is, so do you think the way that millions of people are measuring and understanding heart rate variability has any usefulness?
Oh, it has usefulness, but it's like looking at information through filtered lenses.
Got it. Okay.
When you literally have the opportunity, or let's say technology has developed to have the opportunity to make more specific measurements, and it's basically part of the history of problem solving, where the problem solving has been subcontracted to different specialties.
Hmm.
So it's like a statistician or a signal processor may not have a insight into the neural mechanisms of the signal that they are actually measuring. Likewise, the physiologist might not know the best way of quantifying the neural signal.
Right, right, right. And the reason I even thought of heart rate variability without knowing your input on it is because I didn't understand it at first, and it still doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it's this idea that the greater the variability,
Yeah, you
the
see that that's a easy assumption. Remember,
great,
what's our dialogue is the assumptions.
yeah,
That leads to misbeats being calculated as enhancing variability. And you don't want arrhythmias to contribute to your measure of variability. You
right,
want to exclude them. It has really what the whole basis is, that our body regulates various organs uh, with rhythmic variations. And those signals, like one, so the vagal measure is really something, comes from something that's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's that there's a systematic increase and decrease in heart rate with inhalation and exhalation with the spontaneous frequency of our breathing. It's
mhm,
not causal by breathing. It's coming from a common area of the brainstem that is regulating our breathing and also regulating the heart rate.
okay. Whew. How what is I know we talked about polyvagal theory and we've talked, is it in its simplest term, and I do not mean to simplify like your entire life's work, which is incredible. It's just trying to translate, if somebody were to leave and say, I now understand polyvagal theory, is it that well, let me just ask you, like in its simplest
Okay,
form.
we would basically, I would say that if you left with an understanding that your physiological state impacted on your behavior, that's important.
Okay.
Number two, if you had an understanding of the neural regulation that defines the physiological state you're in, meaning are you recruiting that ventral vagus, are you recruiting the sympathetics, are you recruiting the dorsal vagus? And so so there are ways of understanding that you're in a different physiological state.
Hmm.
And when you start understanding the linkage between that ventral vagal regulation and the face and voice,
Hmm.
suddenly you understand the physiological state of the person seated across from you.
Got it. I love that. Okay.
Uh, so I
That-
call that's when you're polyvagal informed. So you can be a polyvagal informed coach or therapist or human being. You
right.
basically have an awareness of the other person's physiological state, and that informs you where to go.
Very cool. Okay. You mentioned earlier the music modality you created. What was the term for that? The
Well,
safety.
oh, it's safe and sound protocol, but we've developed another one.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, it was designed to trigger that ventral vagus signals of safety, but there's a new one coming out. It's called Rest and Restore.
Okay.
So remember, basically the intervention was focusing on sociality, getting rid of hypervigilance, auditory hypersensitivities. The other one says, I'm now safe. Can I talk to the organs, the neuroregulation of the organs below the diaphragm? Can I talk to the dorsal vagus, which
Mm,
is can be recruited and shut down in fibromyalgia, in basically irritable bowel syndrome? Can I talk to these organs below the diaphragm to tell them it's a safe world? You can be calm. That's what
right.
this music is composed to do. It basically has embedded in it the endogenous bodily rhythms of calmness of our viscera. So we can think of the word entrainment with music, and we're comfortable using that because we know what dance and march music does. But that entrains our skeletal motor. But with different features in the music, we can entrain our viscera, our organs, to calm down. So the
Mm,
new system is basically calming our body down with music that is composed to talk to the autonomic nervous system.
I love.
And
Okay.
another way of thinking of it is it's functionally stealth meditation, because when you think about meditation, it's trying to get rid of all those external things that you're reacting to and letting the body do its own endogenous thing. And this is just sending to the body, remember, this is the rhythm that you like.
That's what I was going to ask. Is it kind of fair to say that music, either one, I don't fully understand the differences in them, but they can put you into
Yeah.
that state
So,
that is more
right.
calming, essentially.
Yeah. But the safe and sound protocol is the way you talk to your dog and 5-year-old.
Right. Right.
Okay, this one is taking talking out of there. You're now safe enough to close the door, put a headset on, turn the lights out,
Hmm.
and you want to literally talk to your body and say, "Come back, help me heal, help me recover, give me resilience, enhance my flexibility." That's what the music is designed for.
How can, if somebody's listening and they're like, I need that, I need to,
That well, the latter one
yeah.
is
Is
basically going into it's going to be available by the end of 2024. It's
okay.
going into testing. We want to find out the clinical effects on it. I mean, there's hypotheticals, and now
Sure.
you want to find out what happens. The safe and sound protocol,
Yep.
there are over 3,000 therapists using it. So it means there's tens of thousands of people have
Okay.
been impacted on it. And that is available through this. Do a Google Unite, UNYTE, Safe and Sound Protocol, and it will come up with the company that's distributing it.
I love that. Okay. I can't let you go without one of the things that drew me to your work was this statement I read about um, polyvagal theory potentially having an answer to or playing part in the Great Resignation. And it talks about the office world and
Oh,
space. Could you tell us a little bit about that linkage?
okay. Because there are a couple things going on because the pandemic was part of that. And what happened during the onset of the pandemic was that people, our normal go to object in our evolutionary history to calm us down, they became a signal of threat.
Oh,
So it became this very paradoxical challenge to our nervous system. Pathogen is a threat, it's real. What do we do when we're under threat? What have we done through the history of humanity? Well, we've engaged other people. Now other people became a threat, and our nervous system got very confused. And we developed a sensitivity very quickly, because I will tell you, I too, and I view myself as a social person,
mhm.
uh, uh, cannot interact with people in the same level that I could beforehand. I get exhausted. And a
Wow.
lot of
Wait.
people may.
So many people have said to me, "Oh, I'm much more introverted post-pandemic than pre-pandemic."
Yeah.
Explain that. What are they saying? They're saying,
They're saying that their nervous system is overwhelmed with the signals of sociality because their nervous system is confused that those signals are now signals of threat and not
"Whoa,"
calmness.
because of the
Uh,
shock of the pandemic.
yeah, the pandemic retuned us. I thought my nervous system would recover rapidly because I was least aware of this.
Hmm.
Now, what I will do, and if send me an email because I'll send you the article.
Yeah.
And I wrote an editorial for a psychiatry journal on this paradoxical reaction, and it's actually the most downloaded paper in that whole journal.
Wow.
So you know, it's open access. I'll give it to you. You can share it with people if they want.
That's great. I'd love to. And does it? Are we also impacted by the stimuli of the office, like the
Oh
noise
yeah,
and the pressures and the stress and the
okay.
eyeballs? They trigger me.
Okay, so there's certain issues of how it's designed. how work environments are designed, just like how our classrooms designed. I
Mhm.
was very much involved in the design of a classroom for autistic children. And what I was trying to do was control the sensory stimuli coming in. So windows were raised, so a lot of light, but not busyness. Carpeting and sound attenuation. Lights were literally reflected off the walls, so it wasn't fluorescence bothering people. In a sense, in an office environment, very little information or very little concern is made to the sensory content. So, like if you work with in a bullpen, literally, where you don't have wall to ceiling, you don't have privacy. Your nervous system is locked in a state of hypervigilance.
I knew it.
Yeah. By the way, before we finish, I do want to mention.
Oh, we are absolutely going to plug that. Don't you
Okay.
worry. Oh, for
Okay.
sure.
Okay. So let me give you a little aside.
Yeah.
That's our new book that I wrote with my son, Seth. It's called Our Polyvagal World, How Safety and Trauma Change Us. But Seth actually was a journalist and now is a filmmaker, and he worked in those bullpens. He worked in
Mm.
those environments. Seth is what I would call a great communicator.
Hmm.
And the issue is, how do you take something as literally complicated as polyvagal theory, and how do you make it accessible? And so Seth gave his father the greatest gift that a son could ever give. He translated it into accessible language.
I love that. Well, and I think you've done a great job as well, especially in this interview, because as I researched it, I was like, man, this stuff is fascinating. And I think anybody listening can understand a lot of it, but it takes rework. It takes going back over it. I think it's hard for the
Well,
unscientific to get it like first time around.
well, here's the paradox. Yes, it's hard to get it, but once you get it, it says, "Oh, this is so intuitive." Of course,
Right.
this is not even hard. This is the way it is, because you're getting closer to our basic neurobiological heritage, our evolutionary heritage. You're understanding who we are, and
Mhm.
through that understanding, it starts making so much sense because it changes our personal narrative of our own lives.
Right. Right. And let's talk about this again. The book is Our Polyvagal World. And I highly recommend it for anybody who has even slightly enjoyed this conversation, because what it symbolizes, number one, as you said, it's more accessible. And number two, it discusses the impact of this idea on us in our everyday lives. Like, for example, in the office environment. For me, it gave me an understanding of honestly why I prefer to be at home most times as opposed to in the office, where we are commonly judged for that and seen as weak or lazy. There's an actual internal mechanism that impacts us all differently.
Yeah. So, from my own perspective as an academic, in a sense, quite disappointed that many academic departments are now primarily remote faculty as well.
Mm,
People don't want to go into their office because, for me, the office was my social network. It
mm-hmm,
was my co-regulatory. It was where ideas were shared.
mm-hmm.
But that was academics from the 70s through, things are changing is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to step back and look at it through the rearview mirror and say, well, that was a wonderful time, but that's not where we are now. And
Mhm.
now I have to kind of understand where we are.
It's a good point too. I talk to people at work about this all the time. It's not that I dislike the office. It's that I dislike being forced to be there during times where I have to do things that the office is not a conducive environment. I
Yeah.
love going meeting, brainstorming, whiteboarding. Love
Yeah.
it. I feel alive. When I have to build a PowerPoint deck out in the open with
Yeah.
noise everywhere, it's
Yeah.
very disconcerting, I guess.
Well, it is for your nervous system. This is
Yeah.
where the part is we talk about individual differences.
Yeah.
For some people, they zone out and they're okay. But
Exactly.
for someone like you, and I would say someone like me, it's like saying, "Why?" It's basically a death sentence.
Yeah.
Why would I take that torture? And so I like offices. I like privacy. I'm an academic at
Yeah.
heart,
Yeah.
but I like a degree of social behavior. And when I was, I would say, the active academic, I could pick and choose. And when I had a large laboratory, if I want a little sociality, I would
Mhm.
go down and pick on my students and technicians,
Exactly. There you
and
go.
I had a nice conference room so I could bring people together and do exactly what you're doing. Close the door, have this brainstorming, have this a shared discovery session,
Wow.
and it was really just it was remarkable. It was wonderful.
Wow. You're just highlighting for me, just to throw this out there. In most organizations, the people who make the rules about where you should work also have offices, but the people who don't make the rules typically
Yeah,
do not. And so
yeah.
you're just that. I mean, it's crazy. Um, Last thing, and you might say, Chris, this is stupid. I don't know. But I had to ask selfishly. When I was like, I don't know, 16, 17, one time I got a big shot at the doctor's and I passed out. And they said,
Uh-huh.
oh, it's vasovagal syncope. And that's when I first became aware of the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
Um, it was astounding to me that like there's a nerve, which I had never heard of, largest nerve in the body, I guess, that can just cause me to lose consciousness
Yeah.
for con- uh, cognitively no reason.
Yeah, well, there's a big reason. What it was doing was triggering your system to stop pumping blood. It's like,
Why would it do that? Because a lot of people this happens to.
yeah, well, you can even have what's called exercise-induced syncope, which is kind of the same thing. But yeah, I had the same thing. I was getting a type of X-ray with a contrast, and they had an infusion in. And I went in there, I said, "This tube is falling out, and can you fix it?" And they twiddled it. They basically moved
Mhm.
it around. Okay, but the point was, in twiddling it, they were stimulating an afferent pathway
A what?
that a sensory pathway
Yeah.
that triggered a vasovagal syncope.
Wow.
So I crashed and my blood pressure really went really low. And they looked at me and said, "Why are you scared?" Now, I wasn't scared. They had stimulated the sensory part of that reflexive limb, and they didn't even know that.
So that it was just they hit a part of the pathway that
That's right.
and what
That's right.
about that pathway though would say, you know what we should do right now?
Okay, that would be the same type of pathway that if you were bleeding out would stop the pumping of blood to so
Oh.
there's this adaptive feature. So your body in a sense goes into this it says more reptilian shutting down response. So there's a slowing up, there's adaptive one. And if you're familiar with yoga,
Yeah.
I I visited Calcutta in the 90s. And this was an interesting story because I met with yogas, one who had cut the linga, the connective tissue of the tongue.
Hmm.
So he could roll the tongue backwards and literally go into a gag reflex because the gag reflex was a vagal reaction that would slow his heart rate up. And he said he did this when he was in a car wreck and saved his life. Basically, he put himself in that vasovagal state.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so the point I'm also saying is that there's a ancient knowledge of how that this manipulation can have some, let's say, health related benefits in the short term.
I mean, so the reason it happens to people when they get blood drawn could be that the
Yeah,
body knows you're losing blood and knows that's a
yeah,
bad thing, so it's going to stop providing blood.
yeah, yeah. It's
Holy.
not fear. So there are cases where people have now a conditioned response, and that's blood phobia or fear of these things.
Yeah.
But in general, they can be stimulating the sensory pathway that is
Whoa.
really telling the brainstem you're bleeding out.
Oh my gosh. Man, I got to tell you, this stuff is incredible. You just opened up a world to me. I can't wait to dive even further into it all.
Well, I think you understand why, even after all these decades, I'm still extremely enthusiastic about it.
I
It's a
know.
it's a wonderful journey to be on because the more you learn, the more you can relate that to really to the life you're living.
Exactly. And
Mm.
helping so many people understand it. Stephen, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The book, Our Polyvagal World, we're going to link to that. I'm also going to get that article from
Yep.
you and we'll post that on the website. Where else can people learn more, past that?
They can go to Polyvagal Institute website,
Okay.
and they can also go to my own website, which is Stephen Porges, I guess, .com. But
Okay.
Polyvagal Institute is polyvagalinstitute.org.
Fantastic. Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Enjoy the time.
All right.
Bye.